from that point, because after that, a lot of people who had networked with him before just started carrying out these mindless acts of, like, you know, killing nobles and killing aristocrats and shit like that, which...
in principle, I'm not against that, but also if that's your program for revolution, then it's not going to work out.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to take out the BP oil executives, more power to them.
Yeah, yeah, totally. But I had a few questions that I just wanted to kind of discuss as a group. He wrote God and the State in 1871 in the heat of the Internationale, and in it he wrote, "The idea of God implies the application of human reason and justice. It is the most decisive negation of human liberty, and necessarily ends in the enslavement of mankind in theory and practice." And I wanted to talk about the implications of this and our struggle today. And so that's my first one I wanted to revolve around. And secondly, his biggest work is Statism and Anarchy. And I wrote, Bakunin accepted Marx's economic and class analysis, but stated, "Liberty without socialism is injustice. Socialism without liberty is slavery." What do you guys think about that? First, what do you think about God and the State? And then the second, Statism and Anarchy. Greg.
I think it actually shows a really deep lack of theological knowledge. I mean, there are as many gods as there are people, and a lot of the sorts of conceptions of God don't necessarily fall into either an authoritarian sort of God, or they don't necessarily entail the abdication of human freedom. Mm-hmm. For example, the deist God, right? The deist God just winds up the world, lets it go and run.
Right. And
deists uphold, right, that human reason is a divine gift from God, which allows for the possibility of freedom. And in that case, since God is indifferent to the world, doesn't intervene, doesn't command, then, you know, it doesn't entail then that sort of God is dominating. I mean, if he's referring to, you know, a hard line Lutheran or Catholic God, then yeah, of course.
Right.
But again, I think that shows a dearth of knowledge on theology.
Would you say he's trying to speak to the majority of people in the world? And I wouldn't say the majority of them are deists. And I would say, I mean, most people that are religion tend to be theists, otherwise, it just seems in that time period at least. But so if you're going to write a paper, you're mostly going to direct it to the theists and not really the deists, because
I feel like his background gave him, well, I mean, you know, he grew up in a traditional aristocratic family, and I feel like, seriously, I feel like he was fucked up from his childhood, and that's, you know, kind of grew this kind of stemmed the whole idea of godlessness. And in addition to, you know, the clergy in Poland who, you know, he sympathized, you know, tremendously. I feel like those are two that, you know, really laid the groundwork to why he said that. So, just to provide context, I think.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate that Will's not here, but I mean, right? You could take the Mormon Church as it is currently, like how it functions, very hierarchical. Like, you know, your parents and your bishop, general authorities, right? It goes on up the line. It's very bureaucratic in that sense, regarding how people are educated, brought up in the church. And so, yeah, you can be very reactionary towards that and become very anti-authoritarian and have it script your childhood and basically scar you for the rest of your life. And that's one way to accept the Mormon Church. But then you can do what Will does, which again, sucks that he's not here, and actually go into the scriptures and say, look, actually what it's preaching is socialism and social justice, and this is how we have to be responding to the text,
yeah,
not
absolutely.
having, right, these general authority figures or the president of the church necessarily tell us what it means. Right? So that's that little layer of interpretation that just seems unnecessary. So in a sense, what I want to say, right, you can do this pretty much with most religions, right? You can actually read it yourself, reason out for yourself, even with another movement like liberation theology. So I mean, these are sort of, I'm sort of responding directly to the question you asked, what does it mean for us today? Like, those are some pathways for us, but I think most of us, I don't want to speak for everybody. Actually, no, Matt's not. But sort of, I don't have. I'll speak for myself then, right? I don't have necessarily any part of religion for revolution.
Well, I mean, just responding to Nathan, and a little bit to what you said, of course you can have the context of reacting to religion, and that should be always kept in mind. But I think my criticism of Bakunin, and I'm going to generalize it, my criticism of most anarchists, is they're not theoretically rigorous, and that plays itself out badly in practice. So, I mean, let me give two examples. One which is not so much a good example, and one which is an incredibly good example. Nietzsche was raised by incredibly religious families, and a lot of the stuff he has is just blatantly and harshly anti-religious. But if you examine his works carefully, there's actually a lot of sympathy to certain religious aspects. Like for all of his criticisms of Christianity, he also recognizes the positive good that it has in showing for concern for other people as a radical break from Roman sort of viciousness of like being a predator. So you can have that sort of those sharp criticisms of religion, but then also include the actual a complex view of it, which I didn't find, at least, and this was years ago that I read God and the State. But the second thing is the second person I would refer you to is Marx, and in fact Marx's view of religion is so theoretically sophisticated that usually his enemies distort his view to make it more simple, right? Everyone has heard Marx say that religion is the opiate of the masses. Now, on its face, that's something absolutely that Bakunin, I think, as far as I can tell, would agree with. But if you read the actual passage, what he says is that religion is the soul of a soulless world. And a religious pain is also a real pain. And it's a humanity in an inhuman world. And so he recognized the theoretical aspect whereby religion was also, it was a negative force in that it deferred revolutionary struggle, but also that it had a real human sentiment and a real human grounding in human suffering that was a sort of valuable humanism.